Okay, thank you very much, Ollie. I will now try and share my screen to see. Let's see what happens. All right. So,
yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I can see it.
okay, quick thumbs up if that's working all right.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Well, first of all, well, thank you very much, Ollie. And as you say, I think it's been at least a couple of years that you've been trying to persuade me to go, or not persuade me, but invite me up to Edinburgh to give a talk in person. So yeah, delighted at least to be doing this online rather than have to postpone for yet another year. And yeah, strange times indeed. It seems, well, less than 2 months even that I was up in Edinburgh doing the Carnethy 5, and who would have thought we'd be in lockdown as we are now. So I'm going to talk about a round of the Munros I did back in 2010. I titled the talk Around the Highlands in 40 Days, but Ollie insisted I'd made a correction to that, which is actually it was 39 days and 9 hours and 6 minutes, because I'm sure certainly Ollie and I'm sure Rob Waddle, who's a stickler for such details, would be telling me off if I didn't make that correction. I guess in keeping with talks like this, and fell runners, I think, come into fell running from a whole range of backgrounds. So I guess to start off with it, and the first, if you like, almost half of the talk really is just to talk a bit about how I found myself getting into fell running, something I didn't really do until I was sort of very late 30s and really 40 before I really could, I think, properly call myself a runner. So going back a bit, and certainly all through school and university, I wasn't a keen sportsman, played a lot of football and rugby and other things, but I was never very good at any of those particularly, and certainly never a runner. And I guess probably like a lot of people, for me it was sort of leaving university and more the social side of sport, I think, rather than the competitive side, looking for a sport to do, and steadily sort of started to get into running. And I think because of where I lived, which is mainly in the south of England or Midlands of England and well away from the fells, I certainly didn't come across fell running and was really a road runner, a cross country runner. And I suppose I actually found I was, compared with any other sport I've ever done, I was actually quite decent at it, but not necessarily at the levels of some of the people watching on this, but I was quite a decent club runner. I think in parallel, I guess I didn't really make the connection with fell running for a long time, but enjoyed climbing mountains and traveling the world, sort of places like New Zealand and the Pyrenees and various other places, and hill walking was, I guess, something I did a great deal of. But I say it really wasn't until my late 30s that I sort of made the connection between actually running and enjoying the hills, and actually started to get into the fantastic sport of fell running, which, yeah, there's me, one of my early fell runs running in the Longmynd in Shropshire, which is near where I used to live. And I suppose that what this talk is about really is long distance stuff and long distance expeditions. And I think this first slide I've put in because I know there's quite a few Carnethy runners looking at this will know this event, and it was really my sort of first venture into doing anything beyond sort of marathon distance or anything like that. This is a bit of a local classic in the Peak District. It's a 42-mile overnight trek around the Derwent watershed, sort of at high moorland level. And the big challenge really is it's done early in March, when the weather can be pretty fickle and generally quite often quite snow on the ground overnight, so the conditions can be pretty bad. And I was first persuaded to do this in 2005, so really not many months before my 40th birthday, by Mark Hartell, and I joined another group of four on this, and find the original photo, so I've had to scan in that image. But that was our team that year, and we were lucky enough to actually win the event, which was, despite for me having an horrendous night out, really not used to doing that sort of distances, certainly compared to the rest of the team. But yeah, pleased enough to win, although it was sort of double-edged sword really, because it then meant for probably now the next 11 years I was sort of felt compelled to keep going back and keep trying to retain the trophy, which I can now tell you that is actually held by a team of Carnethy runners. So, and I think one of the things perhaps to point out here is just the sort of connections made and the friendships made doing some of these events. All three of these characters here, Tim Laney on the left, Mark Cartel and Steve Watts, will all at various times throughout this talk, so their faces will pop up. A recurring theme, I think, that as much as anything, many of these sort of big outdoor, long distance outdoor adventures is about making great friendships with people, I think. So moving on, so sort of appetite whetted, if you like, by start doing long distance things. And I think in parallel, as I say, I'd only just started doing the sort of the Munros in my early 30s. But now I've thought, well, you know, I started to get into the long distance events, and I did a Ramsey round with my friend Tim Laney, who was on that last image as part of the team on the High Peak Marathon, and did that with him in 2006. And at the time, we were very happy to get around in just over 22 hours, which I think, by comparison with most Carnethy runners, seems to be a fairly pedestrian sort of time to be doing it in. But at the time, I was very pleased to have done that. And then later that summer, and something that's really quite interesting looking back now is that I actually, the previous winter, I've been persuaded that I ought to enter by my friend Stephen Watts, again, another one of the High Peak Marathoners, that I ought to do this event called the UTMB, the Ultra Tour of Mont Blanc, which at the time was pretty much, I think, certainly to English fell runners, an unknown event. And the entry requirements for me, it was literally just a case of going onto the website. There was a box that sort of asked about experience, and I put some vague thing about having done the Wasdale Fell race and the Borrowdale Fell race. And I'm sure the organizer of the UTMB had never heard of those events, but it just wasn't the popular event it is now, with qualifying points and all the rest of it. And I got into the event on the strength of a Wasdale Fell race. But to be honest, I'd also ticked the box that said, do I want to pay the €10 or whatever it was insurance if I ever wanted to drop out and get my money back? And I did tick that box, thinking, well, it's 100 miles. I've never done anything like this. There's no way I'm going to do it. But as the following year wore on, it got closer and closer. And Steve Watts kept on goading me, and I thought, oh, well, I suppose I'd really better do it. And eventually, yeah, August of 2006, I did actually go out to Chamonix and did the UTMB. And to be honest, and I think some of these things, it probably helps a certain amount of ignorance of what you're letting yourself in for. I actually surprised myself and got round in a fraction over 24 hours, which is, yeah, quite a respectable time, I think.
That's fast.
And then another long distance thing, and that I did the following year, I think, you know, really I suppose, getting hooked by the experience of doing some of these long distance outings and the fun of doing it. And also, again, it's the whole friendship thing of getting outings with friends and doing things like that was to go back and do something I'd first done in a few years earlier, which was to do a duathlon in Scotland, which someone called Martin Stone, who's Mr. Sport Identity, he organised that. That was at the time when I first did it. It was a duathlon event, so it's up and down the 4,000ers in around Glen Nevis, and then jump on a bike and cycle over to the Cairngorms, and complete the other 5 4,000 footers in the Cairngorms as a duathlon. But there's a longer established round for it, which is something that was first dreamt up by the Rucksack Club, sort of way back in, I think, the 1950s, and various people over the years, including Martin Stone, who held the record for it, had done it as a complete on foot challenge. So I had a go at doing that in 2007 and managed to complete that route in just over 20 hours. And that's me top right on the last one, or the last peak, Cairngorm, and then finishing down at just outside Aviemore at the Glenmore, or just near Glenmore Lodge. Now moving further afield in 2007, and actually this is a trip that a friend of Mark Hartell sort of really encouraged and organised, and this photograph here really sort of, I guess, sums up what that trip was about. Really, there were two objectives of that trip. One was that, as you can see in the background, there's a stupendous mountain there called Amadablam, and we were aiming to climb that as a team of people. And the second part of the trip was something Mark, who was obviously a very keen aficionado of long distance rounds, was keen to repeat run from Everest Base Camp back to Kathmandu, which was obviously historically, before the roads were put in, before there were any wireless communications. It was really the only means of communication from the various historic Everest expeditions to get news out to the outside world. And during and through the 80s and 90s, it had been established as a bit of a challenge run for some of the sort of big long distance running fraternity. And Mark had decided we as a team ought to have a go at seeing if we could break the record for that. So the team was myself, Mark, and in the middle there is Lizzie Hawker, who I'll come back to in a minute, as I'm sure many of you have heard of. Else to point out about this, and probably just to point out also that this is Mark has never been that shy on publicity, so this wasn't us bounding down the hill on our actual round. This is just a publicity shot that Mark thought was a good idea to get, and you'll see in a few slides further on that it was a much steadier pace when we actually did it on the day. So the trip itself is a fantastic trip, because the first thing we needed to do was, on arrival in Kathmandu, is really sort of still pre Google Earth, and much of the route back from Everest Base Camp was it's not on the sort of main tourist trail of Everest Base Camp trekkers, which is just the last section up below Everest. Most of it was through sort of rainforest and skirting around the edges of paddy fields, and it was actually pretty difficult to find any sort of maps at all that really told us where we were going. So Mark and I and our team spent a day sort of browsing second-hand bookstores in Kathmandu, trying to find maps and put together a route. And once we'd sort of put together and chopped and hacked together various bits of map that we could find, Mark and I then thought we'd better recce the route. So we basically took a bus out of short distance out of Kathmandu and spent about 5 or 6 days walking sort of sweatily through various sort of jungle rainforest tracks around paddy fields, till eventually we sort of arrived at Namche Bazaar, which is as you can see sort of getting closer as you sort of work your way higher up into the hills and you start seeing sights of the big high mountains of the Himalayas. So just the recce itself would have been itself a fantastic expedition, just finding our way out there. But anyway, that was But then over the next 4 weeks, we had the challenge of climbing Amadablam, which sadly I wasn't able to complete. I ended up with a very bad chesty cough, and to be honest, at the 4 weeks later, when we were ready to start off on our run from Everest Base Camp, I wasn't in any great physical shape, and Mark himself had also gone down with something, so it wasn't great. But anyway, about 3-4 weeks later, we found ourselves at Everest Base Camp on a chilly Thursday morning at about 7 a.m. And this is Mark, who's still, I believe, holds the record for the most peaks in 24 hours in the Lake District. And sitting next to him is Lizzie Hawker, who I'm sure most of you will have come across or know of Lizzie, but a fantastically talented runner who, amongst other things, has won the UTMB about, I think it's 5 times, and at one stage held the world record for the longest distance run in 24 hours, which was something like 156 miles. So 6 marathons in a 24-hour period with his run. So yeah, an amazing athlete. So anyway, so there we were, 7 a.m. Thursday morning, Everest Base Camp ready to run. Just shy of 200 miles and about 11,000 meters. Horrible chesty coughs. So this is just a little bit lower down, sort of set off about 4 hours in, and a repeat of the shot you saw earlier, but this is the one for real now, and definitely going at a much steadier pace. And this, I think, is probably really summarizes what it was like for me for the first sort of 24 hours of the run. In most of this period, it was all above an altitude of about 4,000 meters. And to be honest, every time I broke into anything much more than a really slow stumbling run, I would sort of have this horrible hacking cough. And I spent, the first 24 or so hours just cursing Mark and Lizzie because I was really struggling to keep up with them. And it was really only once we sort of dropped below about 3,000 meters that I actually started to be able to breathe. But I think what was interesting about that run, apart from the stupendous scenery that we were going through, was we didn't really have much of a strategy for that run. And I recall that 24 hours in, so setting off Thursday morning, we ran all day Thursday, through the night Thursday, and into Friday. And so most of that period, me struggling to keep up with Mark and Lizzie. And we'd sort of vague idea that we'd said we would stop for a sleep at some point when we felt tired. And to be honest, I was desperate to lie down at various points. That Mark and Lizzie were sort of almost goading each other on and pushing the pace ever harder with me struggling along behind. But I think eventually, after about 40 hours of running, Mark finally, I think, had pushed himself to a standstill and really run himself into the ground, and I was ready to stop. And so Mark at that point called it quits. Lizzie, well, I don't know, she was like as one of those Duracell bunnies. She was just bouncing on, just really still wanting to go. But eventually I sort of was almost ready to pack it in, but said we have to find somewhere to stop. So we did eventually find a barn just near the roadhead, about, by this stage, about 100 miles now from Everest Base Camp. And after a short 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and I sort of lying in amongst the straw bales in this barn, and I could sort of see already that after about 3 or 4 hours that Lizzie was desperate to get going again and was jumping around, and me thinking, do I really want to do this? But feeling guilty because seeing how keen she was to get on. So eventually I did drag myself up, and Mark at that point dropped out and agreed he would meet up with us later, and we set off again, once more sort of hitting the dirt tracks and another sort of 15, 16 hours of continuous running. And we eventually reached the road at a small village called Muda. An amazing sight we got there, which was that by this stage we'd probably been running with about 3 hours sleep in a barn and amongst some straw. We'd been running about 60 odd hours. More than once we'd got a bit lost in amongst the paddy fields and the rainforests, and eventually we came out at this village which we by the roadhead, and I hadn't really expected to see anyone because it was probably about 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening. It just gone dark. But what we hadn't anticipated in this particular shot here was that Mark and the other members of our team had hired a taxi for Mark by the stage he got back to Kathmandu, and they'd hired a minibus which they'd driven out to this village at the roadhead. And the local villagers, this was certainly well off the tourist trail, and the villagers not really used to seeing tourists, wondering what on earth was going on. And when they I don't think they really twigged what it was, but they explained that there were these 2 British runners running from Everest Base Camp to Kathmandu, and the word seemed to get around the village. So by the time we emerged out of the rainforest, there was literally the whole village was out and jumping and shouting and screaming. And then about the next 3 or 4 miles down the road, as we set off on the road then back to Kathmandu, we were accompanied by about 50 or 60 children all running alongside us in their flip-flops and keeping up with us. And so we went on into the, this is getting on early Sunday morning. So getting on for this towards the start of the third day of our run. And it really was starting to get grindingly hot, grindingly painful, and really, really quite horrible. And even, you can see it, Lizzie, I think, was even beginning to struggle at this point. But eventually, 3 days in and 190 odd miles, we sort of reached the outskirts of Kathmandu. And the challenge was, and I'm not quite sure who set this, was that you had to finish in the National Stadium of Nepal, which is where we were here, just finishing in the National Stadium. And by some quirk of fate, our run or our finishing our run on Sunday morning coincided with the Nepal national football team playing a World Cup qualifying match against some other Southeast Asian nation. So as we arrived, there was a band marching up and down the middle of that green patch in the middle. The military band were practicing, and the sort of word got out that what we had done, and the band started playing up. And then there were also various TVs all there for the football match, and they decided it was going to be great that they would interview us. So we were on headline news on Nepal TV that evening. I'm not sure what coherent words I was able to say after whatever it was, three days, 2 hours, and a few minutes of running with this one short 2 or 3 hours sleep in a barn. But anyway, news headlines we were in. And that was just minutes later, collapsed in the cab on the way back to our hotel. That's what your feet look like after 200 miles and 3 days continuously running in a pair of trainers. And so that's sort of the bit of irrelevant background really to what you've actually come here this evening or tuned into this evening to come and listen to, which is the Monroe round. So the background to this really was, so yeah, done various long distance things over the preceding few years. And in 2010, at that stage, I was working at Rolls-Royce, and it was becoming fairly evident that there was a sort of likelihood of redundancy. So, and I guess obviously for a lot of people, redundancies is not necessarily a great thing, but for me, I was more than happy by this stage to leave that particular job, and so I got myself front of the queue for redundancy, and I started to think, well, rather than just dive straight in and look for my next job, it's how am I going to usefully fill my time when I'm redundant, and you know, what can I do to fill that time? And rather than going further afield and back out to Nepal or somewhere similar, I started to think, well, maybe I can do something in Scotland, and started to look at doing Monroe rounds. And there wasn't a great deal of documented evidence, you know, so it's quite a bit of research getting it, sort of looking into this and finding out who had done what. And I just noted here some of the sort of more notable rounds that had happened. So, so the first really to complete a continuous round of the Munros was Hamish Brown back in the 1970s, which, you know, and he's published in his book a meticulously planned round where he sort of organised food drops and all sorts of other things on the route and buried food stashes on the way. And off the top of my head, I can't think what his book is, but he wrote a fantastic book describing that. Yes, right, Hamish's mountain walk, but it was a fantastic description of his particular round, him walking that. And then sort of later into the 80s, one or two sort of fell runners started turning their attention to the round, and obviously times very naturally started to speed up. So, and I guess sort of notable ones there were famously Hugh Simmons in 1990 completed a complete on foot round of the Munros, which he did in 66 days, and not content with that, he carried on to complete all the remaining 3,000 footers in the Lake District and in Wales, and then crossed over to Ireland to complete that. And then a bit later on, I think a year or two later, two Scottish runners, Rory Gibson and Andrew Johnston, then paired up to bring the time down and to 51 days, 9 hours. They time, rather than doing the whole lot on foot as Hugh had done, they linked it up with sections on a bike. And then a few years later, in 2000, Scottish postman Charlie Campbell set his sights on a fast round, and he did it again as a self-proclaimed round on a bike and on foot. He did it in 48 days and 12 hours back in 2000. And he also added in that as a completely self-propelled round, he swam across from Mull to the mainland and also swam out to and back from the Isle of Skye. And as I researched the round and looked into this, I sort of mentioned that I was keen on doing this to Martin Stone. And Martin, as I said, is amongst other things, he's the founder of Sport Ident. So many of you will have come across him for the timing systems and result systems for races. He also established and for many years ran the Low Alpine Mountain Marathon in Scotland. And just generally, Martin is incredibly well connected in the trail running community. Seems to know everyone and has their address or their email and contact details, and knows everything about every long distance record that's ever been run in trail running world. And Martin, as well as giving his own personal encouragement and support and suggesting this is a great idea, put me in touch with Charlie Campbell. And so Charlie then got in touch with me, and I think the two bits of advice that Charlie gave to me when I spoke to him about this as I was thinking about doing this round, one of which was that he said, get a camper van. He said, you'll need support. And he said, the next thing is, as well as a camper van, he said, get a great team of supporters to help you. And that was fairly clear that those were two important things. And for me, the first part was, well, I didn't own a camper van. So that was the first thing I needed to address. So most of the winter before my run road around was spent converting this camper van in my dad's workshop down in Suffolk, rather than getting out on the hill. So I decided I didn't really want to blow all my redundancy money. So I bought this van and spent most of the next few months converting that. And the second part of the challenge, as Charlie had said, was get great support. And to be honest, at the time, I wasn't a member of a big fell running club. I sort of did most of my running as a member of Staffordshire Moorlands, which, although there were one or two very good fell runners, there certainly wasn't amongst the big fell running clubs. So I didn't really have that many friends and contacts that I knew that would be able to come out and help me. And it was only really one evening in the pub at home where I lived in Stone at the time, just chatting to one or two friends, and there was a friend, John Clements, a fell runner himself, retired, and I mentioned that I was thinking of doing this, but that the logistics of organising it was all going to be a huge challenge, and I was looking for people who would probably share in a rota, sort of do odd weeks on and off driving this van around for me and meet me in the Highlands and support. And then JC said, I'll do it. And I said, all right, yeah, okay, that would be great. So which week do you fancy doing it? He said, no, I'll do the whole lot. So that was fantastic, really. So from that moment, JC, as I didn't know him well, just a sort of an occasional drinking buddy in Stone. So I said, yeah, and he and I then sort of became a team over the winter and trying to work out the logistics and organise it all and generally work out plans. In terms of the on-foot preparation, it was the winter of 2009-10 was actually a really, really snowy, heavy winter, and it was a winter that went on long into the spring. So this is me on one of the few recce's I actually managed to do up there in sort of March time, up in and around Glen Shiel, just showing how much snow was on the ground. And I was actually at the time sort of quite concerned that perhaps I should delay my setting off on my round, because there really was so much snow on most of the hills in Scotland. But I actually, as I was putting plans in place, there were too much of the logistics were getting fixed, and one of those was just working out a route and who was going to be where and when. So after sort of many evenings poring over the map, I eventually came up with a route which was, I wanted to, you know, I wanted to repeat as Charlie had done as a self-propelled round, so it was all going to be under my own steam, although I wasn't going to swim across the water, but chose to paddle that across from Mull and also across Loch Lomond. So that was one of my first challenges, was I thought, well, if I start off on Mull on Ben More, I can at least pick my time for starting and get the paddle out of the way across the water there and choose my tides. So that was where I started, and then really I sort of built a route from there, which was the reverse on this lower section of the Highlands. I essentially did the reverse of what Charlie had done. Charlie had done anti-clockwise around that lower section. I decided really just to be a little different to what Charlie had done, that I would go in the opposite direction and then work my way steadily north up the west coast. You know, one of the other big challenges for me was always going to be the Cooling Ridge, because although I've done some climbing, I'm certainly not a climber. So I was, you know, had a few options there to make sure that there was going to be a weather window for me to get along the Cooling Ridge, and then continue after that, work my way north and hopefully finish up on Ben More in the far north, Ben Hope on the far north of Scotland. And the challenge I'd set myself was that I, fairly arbitrary, I think, just decided, because Charlie had done it in 48 and a half days, that I would set myself the challenge that I would try and do this in 40 days. Not really knowing whether it was possible or how that would work out. But realizing fairly quickly that once, you know, when you looked at all these days, that was going to be some pretty hefty big days, and there weren't going to be rest days in between or that many easy days in between. You know, you're basically keeping up an average of over 7 Munros a day, and you know, typically 3,000 meters plus of ascent on most days. So, and certainly people like Tim Laney, who's a more experienced Munroist than me, who was sort of raising eyebrows and was, wouldn't say doubtful, but yeah, certainly was sort of suggesting there was a challenge going to be to do that. So anyway, route set, various assistants and supporters lined up, van now completed, JC as my driver, arrived on Ben More on Mull, or the base of Ben More, 25th of April 2010, on a fairly sort of typically Greek Scottish day, and at 6 AM set off up Ben More, and then the challenge underway. And I do recall, yeah, I suppose because I had been so busy with the organising the logistics, and to be honest, only actually completing the conversion of the van about the week before. I've been, you know, very much preoccupied with that, and I guess in a way I hadn't thought so much about the physical challenge and the sheer scale of what I was doing. And I do recall it was a sort of, I guess it was a bit like, yeah, sort of setting off on some major race. It was sort of the sort of nerves and the butterflies as I set off on that first morning. And then, yeah, this is me 2 hours later, just returning off Ben More. First Munro done. Yeah, as we're all familiar with, sort of with Scottish weather, the sort of rain that set in. And I think, yeah, that sort of initial nerves, I think that was pretty soon, and that was probably the last I felt of it. And I think pretty much from that moment, returning down off Ben More, and for the next, whatever it would be, 39 days, it very much became, yeah, not a daunting challenge, but just, yeah, there were hard days and tough days, but it was essentially after that, I think, it was fun, and it was just, became a way of life, really. It was sort of settled in a routine with JC and support, and to be honest, for a lot of it, it was just JC and I for company, with various friends joining for odd periods here and there. And so that first day, this was a sort of fairly typical pattern of most days. It was sort of up at 6, underway, back at the van at 8 o'clock, hopped on the bike, short cycle around to Fishnish, which is on Mull, into a kayak, which in this kayak was very kindly supplied by a guy called Tony Hammock, who runs, or certainly did at that time, I don't know, still runs now, a sea kayaking business in Oban. And when I been looking around for support for this, and I'd emailed him. He'd very kindly said, yeah, no problem. I'll turn up, just tell me what day and when, and I'll turn up with a couple of kayaks, and very kind, all free of charge. He turned up with this very nice sea kayak, and he escorted me across from Mulbach to the mainland. And that was it. And there's got a slide later on, very much in contrast to the paddle across Loch Lomond, which I sort of organised myself. But yeah, so that was back on the mainland now, and so very much sort of settled into a routine, a bit of uphill, bit of paddling, and now onto the bike, and a 60-mile cycle ride up the shores of Loch Lomond to Glenfinnan. And that, I think, just sort of illustrates really that was my first day, and I guess sort of gives you an idea of a sort of fairly typical pattern of the day. So it was a 6 o'clock start, 2 hours on Ben Moor, bike ride, paddle, another 60-mile bike ride into Glenfinnan, a mountain bike ride up Glenfinnan, a couple more Munros in the evening, and back at the van for about 8 o'clock. And that was the first day done, about a 14-hour first day. And that, yeah, this was sort of set the tone of what it was going to be like now for the next 39 days. And so I think this slide really is just illustrating what that, you know, what that pattern looked like. So this is really the first week. So that was day one. Day two was, and for those who've done the Ramsey round or similar, it was basically just up the Ben and across to the Grey Corries and via Zanes and down to Glenfeshie. That was sort of about a good third of the Ramsey round, probably a bit more than a third of the Ramsey round on day two. And then day 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for the first week saw me round Ben Alder, the Monaleer, Drumocta Hills, and the Eastern Cairngorm. So at the end of week one, and that it was a fairly regular pattern. That was 51 Munros done, and it sort of really settled into it. I sort of chosen this day as another highlight day. So at the end of week one, find myself in the Larrig Guru, the Curragh Bothy, which I'm sure many of you have visited, and having spent the first week with all the hill days on my own, and yeah, quite happy on my own company. But it was really nice for the second week that I was joined by two really good friends, Mike Nelson and Digby Harris, who were both themselves, you know, keen trail runners, and Digby himself has done many notable long distance outings. And so they joined me, met up with me in the Curragh Bothy and Larrig Guru on a freezing cold morning on this is already now the 2nd of May, but it's absolutely bitterly cold easterly wind blowing in. So this is us at about 5 o'clock in the morning, sort of getting ready to set up to complete all the Eastern Cairngorm. So effectively sort of the 10 to the east of the Larrig Guru, which is, I guess, a good chunk of the Rigby round for that day. So this is that's climbing up out towards that big Carnethy and heading out that way. And you can see how well sort of tugged up we were. Both our sort of windproofs and winter gloves and the full works. And this is now sort of looking out towards the Ben McDewey and onwards. Fortunately, it was, say, with the wind chill, the whole day it was, the temperature never really got above freezing, and with this bitter easterly wind, it was a wind chill down at -10, -20 for most of the day. But fortunately, that did mean that the snow itself was nice and firm and was lovely to run on. But the only other people I saw out that day were various ski tourers, and certainly no one on foot. That's just a bit more of the day. And this is later on in that same day up Ben Vane, and finally sort of getting towards sunset now. And the last Munro of the day, about 9 p.m. that evening, which would be Derry Cairngorm, I think. Just enough daylight now to give us enough time to trot out to the Linn of Dee, where we got back probably about 10 p.m. that evening. So another sort of 16-hour day, which again was becoming the norm. I mean, it's probably worth mentioning though that I think, in contrast to some of the more intense rounds that we've seen over recent years, and sort of likes of Steve Birkinshaw and others, and Paul Tierney and others, and some of the things that Jasmine's done. I don't think, although there were big days out, I certainly was never pushing myself physically quite as hard as that. I think there was, throughout the round, I think there was time to enjoy it, and I think you'll probably see from the smiles on people's faces, it never became quite as agonising as some of those other activities that some other people have done, which suggests to me that I'm sure someone, if they push themselves, could probably go quicker. But anyway, yeah, so more days out, and also have friends on bikes coming up to support, which was helpful, although we're struggling to keep up with one or two of them by the look of this one. And again, yeah, just showing this, I think it's just illustrating, although never got the horrendous wet weather and foul weather that could have really scuppered the sort of round around the Munros over that sort of length of time. I do recall at the time just how every day seemed to be bitterly cold for about the first week, 10 days. It was, yeah, and this is just another one. This is up around Loch Nagar again, with every sort of shred of clothing on that we could get on, and sort of, yeah, sort of with wind chill and sort of well below freezing. Yeah, this is me there, yeah. And then particularly as you get tired on some of these big long days out, you're regulating body temperature. You're really finding you're hauling on more clothes than you're used to on a typical running expedition. So this is me and Digby at the end, still into our second week now. And this is, yeah, and I think I included this one actually just interesting because whether or not it will happen this year, quite possibly not. So this is now around Spittal of Glen Shee, which is part of, I think, the Glen Shee 9 race. But sadly, whether or not that will happen later on this year as a British Championship race, I don't know. But that was off coming down to the Spittal of Glen Shee on the day out round there. And just share now, it's one of the advantages of the sort of the unseasonable late winter and plenty of snow was that some of the descents were made easier. I must admit that was one part of it that was fun and quite enjoyable at times. I think this slide really just illustrating, yeah, when you start to put together these big rounds and trying to piece together some of the more remote Munros, you do get to visit corners of the Highlands that you just wouldn't normally visit. So I think this is me looking probably south-ish, southwest at the sort of the top end of Glen Taff sort of area on another sort of big remote day out. And on that one, most of the time I was able to get back to the van. That was part of the logistics of the round, was that with probably about half the days it was really just me on my own with JC in the van. I either always tried to make it or did always make it back to the van for the night, or worst, I had several bothy stops. So I think this was one of the rare occasions where I was able to take advantage of supporters coming up to help me. So Mike Nelson on this occasion did the pack mule bit and came out carrying 2 tents and sleeping gear for myself and Digby and himself. We spent the night in high up in Glen Till, on about the only patch of flat ground that was probably for miles around by the look of it. And I mentioned before JC, and I think it's definitely worth mentioning, or not mentioning, but thanking him once again online, because I think, you know, without this trip, it really would never have happened. And I say, sort of from the day that JC sort of said, yeah, I'll do it, and casually agreed to. I don't think he quite knew what he was letting himself in for. Yeah, we set up as a really great team actually, and we sort of, you know, got going a really good routine over the course of the sort of 6-7 weeks we were out there. I certainly didn't, you know, so apart from sharing the odd beer with him, I didn't know him well, and it was one of the interesting things as to quite how we were going to get on and organise ourselves. And he knew very little about me as well, but but yeah, we sort of settled into this routine where we sort of discuss the day's plans and study maps. And one of the key things that we needed to do was, and it never actually, for the full 40 days, it did work out really well, was that the one key thing that I left with JC on every day was an absolute double and triple checking of the grid reference as to where I was going to come off the hill to meet him, and roughly what time. And yeah, so that never worked. That never failed to work out. That JC was always there where they agreed, and I thankfully always managed to come out to where I said I would be. And I think JC, to be fair, had a, you know, he didn't know the Highlands that well at the time, and I think he ended up with having a fantastic 6 weeks holiday, because he got to places he most certainly would never have seen, and sitting around in the van in obscure parked up laybys, etc., etc. He got to talk to an awful lot of people that I'm sure he'd never talked to, and yeah, I think he himself said he had a great holiday out of it. But it's also interesting, actually. It wasn't just a holiday for him. I mean, he actually did a huge amount of work and support, and a lot of it I was probably unaware of at the time, whilst I was happy sort of trotting around the hills. He was, as you can see here, he was busy washing and making sure that I had clean sets of clothes throughout the 6 weeks. You know, I never got back to the van, whatever time of day or night it was that I got back to the van, and you know, more than one occasion it was well after midnight when I got back. You know, there was always JC had prepared a hot meal and was still up and about waiting for me. So did a tremendous job. And the other thing he did really well as well was that there were various friends that were sort of booked up to come and join us and meet up with us at various stages. And clearly, as I was busy out on the hill every day, I couldn't keep in touch with who was doing what. So JC sort of kept up to date with the blog, and was also the communications hub for the team in terms of arranging with various friends and supporters coming up to meet us, and making sure that we were where we said we'd be, and transporting people around. They did a fantastic job for me there. So this is now still week 2, and this is moving. And I think actually is that you can join the chat just to quite challenge this with no interaction from anyone. So this is day 13 of my round, and it's my 100th Munro. So anyone on the chat, first one to come up with the correct answer. I'm not sure what the prize will be. I think Steve Fallon, if he's watching, might be barred from entering this one, but anyone else can submit their guesses to where I am for my 100th Munro on day 13. We'll come back to that one. And finally, actually getting some good weather to survey some of the mountains I'd already climbed, and still obviously the majority, but 100, whatever it is, 183 still to go at this point. And this is on Loch Lomond now, and this is in stark contrast to the sleek sea kayak that I was using to paddle across from Mull to the mainland. This was friend Ian and Sam. They said, "Oh, we will come up with some kayaks." So they came up with these. I think they were ex-Scout. Ian, their friend Ian, I think he'd bought them online on eBay or something from a Scout trip that was getting rid of excess stock. So these were. I'm absolutely no kayaker or paddler at all, but these were these flat bottom things that seemed to have absolutely no sense of how to, well, at least I had absolutely no sense of how to steer them. And as we set off, there was this sort of a fierce wind blowing down Loch Lomond, and as you can probably see from the pictures there, it took, I think the paddle across from Mull to the mainland, which is about something just over 2 miles, took about 30-35 minutes or something, if I recall. This short paddle across Loch Lomond, which is probably barely 800 meters, must have taken about 45 minutes each way, with the kayaks just veering all over the place. And I sort of blame the kayaks, but it was probably as much as anything my incompetence with the paddling. But anyway, this slide of a particularly uninteresting sort of hill scene really was just I included to say that at this point, sort of progress was all going swimmingly. You know, I was keeping to the pretty much to the schedule. I was making the odd adjustment here and there, but basically keeping to the schedule that I'd set, and confounding one or two friends that had told me I was far too ambitious in that schedule. I was never going to keep up with it, and friends like Tim Laney is dropping me texts and telling me to slow down because there wouldn't be any left when he was coming up to support. And possibly I thought maybe it was going all a bit too well, because at this point, sort of both physically and mentally, I was really quite enjoying it and sort of happy keeping up the schedule. But then I started to develop, as I approached the Arica Alps, a really sore Achilles out the, well, sort of, I suppose it had built up over a day or two. And then on sort of the day on the Arica Alps, I remember it just really became incredibly sore and inflamed and swollen. And I sort of looked down, I could see it was clearly quite swollen and red and really warm to the touch. And it really sort of at that point, I thought, oh, you know, that was the first moment when I really thought, oh dear, you know, I sort of really began to wonder, was I overdoing it? What was the problem here? Was I just, you know, although physically I seemed to be coping with these big days, was it really actually my body was really just telling me to slow down and back off? Yeah, and I had a sort of a day or so of really starting to think, oh, yeah, what am I going to have to do? And I actually ended up calling short that day, but actually also on that same day, actually, thankfully, I worked out what the problem was. It wasn't just sheer physical sort of falling apart, setting in as I was overdoing it. But what I realised was it was actually down to my very bad organisation and all the rest of it, which was that with the focus on converting the van and various other things, I really left it to the last minute to actually even think about what shoes I was going to wear on this round. And literally 2 or 3 days before I set off, I put in an order to get a whole load of Innovate shoes. And I put my order in to get these shoes, and I hadn't actually properly checked what shoe size I was. And it was only when they arrived, and these were a size UK 9.5, and I always with Innovate, and I should have known this, I always had the UK 9, but I thought, well, I lace them up a bit more tightly than normal, they'd be absolutely fine. And to be honest, and obviously they had been for the first couple of weeks, but the fact that they were just a bit half a size too big, what I hadn't realised was, and I noticed on this particular day when I was slowing down and really looking at this sore ankle, was that on the descents, the extra size meant that the shoe was slopping around on my foot slightly more than it would normally, and that was just sufficient for the heel tab on these shoes just really gently, not enough to make any sort of a mark on my heel, but enough to obviously to irritate the tendon or the tendon sheath or something. And thankfully, yeah, so from that moment it was a huge relief when I realised that was what the problem was. But the only snag was that I didn't actually have in the van any shoes of the correct size. So basically I ended up taking out a pair of scissors and hacking away all the heel tabs for these oversized Innovates, and putting out a call to friends to actually see if they could come up with some size 9 shoes and bring those up. But thankfully, yeah, so I ended up for probably the next 3 or 4 days really, really sore Achilles, but I was pretty confident then, although I had some, yeah, pretty nasty days where the Achilles was pretty sore. I wasn't going to make it worse, and so I carried on and pushed on. I don't know what point was all these. I presume these are the chats, are they? I don't know if I.
Yeah, you might want to stop Spyke and let the winner know, because the tension is mounting.
Yes, where can I see these people?
So click on the chat at the bottom of the screen.
Oh, hang on.
Bring up another window.
It appears to be at the top. Hang on. No, hang on. We've got Ben Kruken, Stucker Croin, no. Ben Down. Where's Ben Down? Snowden, no. Dunno. Sean Fry, no. Ben Ducray, Ben Louis, no. Rob Woodall, Stubbinion, no. Scogui, no. Ben Oss, no. Ben Kruchen, Stephen Croy, no. How many guesses are we allowed, says Murdo? More than one, I think.
We have
The
284.
second pair of socks have done the trick. They might well have done, yep. Quite right. Mealgarve, no. Being too Laken, that's a good spelling of that. No. Keep the quiz open because no one seems to have got it yet. If you look at a map, it might give a bit of a clue that it's sort of somewhere fairly far south. And I might have to narrow it down a bit. So keep guessing, everyone. Right, and anyway, we'll move on a bit. There we are. So advancing the slides on. So yes, so and if anyone can count quickly enough, you should be able to work out what the 100th Munro is on that little list there. So anyway, onwards we go. Now I was relieved I didn't have an Achilles problem that was going to cause me to call the round short or to slow down and fall off schedule. So back on schedule now, after a sort of a shortened day or two around Arica. And yeah, it's across the Great Glen now, so it's well over halfway, within 20 days. Huge solo round of the Noidart Munros along the way there. About a sort of 16, 17 hour day out from Barrows-Dale and out onto Loch Cuich. And then onwards and over the bridge to Spyke. And I guess this was, for me, was always from the beginning of the round, always likely to be one of the crux round, because of the Cooling Ridge. If the weather was great, it was going to be okay. But as I think, as mentioned, I've done some climbing, but I certainly don't count myself as a climber. And obviously, doing the full Cooling Ridge is a it does take in some significant scrambles on the odd bit of climbing. So I was quite keen that I was able to take this on in good weather and with the support of friends to do it. And that was an interesting one for me because just in April, before I set off on my round, I'd completed my first Cooling round with my friend Steve Watson. We'd actually completed it when we finished the Cooling Ridge and topped out on Skirn and Gillian, which was my first Munro, which I finished literally about 2 weeks before I set off in the second round. And I was really reliant on Steve coming up to support on the second round because navigation-wise, and particularly as you can see here, the weather was pretty overcast. It can be quite challenging, I think, on the Cooling round, and you can make a wrong turn here or there, and you can start up some rocks that look as though it might well be the right route, but if you get the wrong route, you can what should be a sort of a medium, an easy grade scramble can quite quickly turn into a sort of a V diff or a worse type, worse climb, and I was quite keen to avoid that. Well, unfortunately, Steve Watts, who was so penciled in to support me, knows the Cooling Ridge extremely well. He literally in the week before he'd turned his ankle on a run round in the lakes, and his ankle, the reports coming through, his ankle was swollen to the size of a football, and he clearly was going to struggle to get up and support. But then, nonetheless, he drove up there with another friend, Neil King, who, by contrast to Steve, didn't know the Cooling Ridge at all. His navigation skills are, I suspect, worse than mine. And sorry, ahead of it there. And probably what's worse than that, Neil is the most impetuous person I've ever met in terms of just jumping in to do anything. And Steve will regularly recount trips out with Neil at the end of a climb where Neil will point out that he's forgotten to clip in or do whatever. But anyway, so Neil had volunteered to stand in Steve's stead, and so the two of us set off on this round. And what we were armed with, again, not having great familiarity with very little familiarity with the Cooling Ridge, was that Steve, who's, as those who know him, and is probably one of the sort of the unsung heroes of long distance fell running, and is got the most incredible memory for long distance, for routes and rounds. And on the drive up with Neil, he basically sat in the car and from memory had sketched together on about 3 sheets of A4 the route description for Neil and I to do the complete Coolin Ridge. And I've kept copies of it. And this is, I think this is page 1 of the Coolin Ridge. And it was basically these 3 sheets that that got Neil and I across the ridge, bar for one. I think it notes it there, Scumain as it's. Oh, hang on, just jump forward that 36 slides more than I need to. The Scumain there is that which actually isn't in Munro. We actually inadvertently climbed thinking we were on Sker Ellesmere, and it took us both a while in the mist to work out that we were actually on the wrong peak. But that aside, we managed the ridge okay. And Steve actually did manage, and Steve Watts here on the right, did actually manage to get up and join us on the in pin and join us on the climb there and belayed me off that. And this is actually the weather improving as the day went on, as we worked our way across the ridge. And yeah, eventually finished and topped out on Skirnan Gillian. And a fantastic day out, as anyone who's done the Coolin Ridge will know. Next day, cycle back to the mainland and cycle up Glen Shiel. And this was to do the North Glen Shiel Ridge. And as we pulled up into the car park for the next foot session, and we cycled back from the Isle of Skye, greeted by this gentleman in the car park. And I won't put this up as a quiz because I'm sure many of you will recognise him, but it was actually Hamish Brown had got wind that there was a Munro, someone doing an attempt to fast Munro round, so he'd somehow contacted various friends and worked out that we might just be in this part of the Highlands as he was driving through. So he called in, and I ended up having about 20-minute chat with Hamish about his experience back in 1974 of doing the round and comparing notes on how different it was the way we were doing it. And I think he's a lovely bloke actually, and I think what was nice is I think he absolutely understood and he sort of got the fun that we were all getting doing it in a sort of very different style to which he had done his round, and he sort of wished me luck as I set off on the next leg of the journey. And since everyone's done so badly on the first quiz, your next question will be, so we're moving up the west coast of the Highlands now, and this is getting towards the end, and now this is 29th of May, and still the cold winter weather is still lingering around. And I think there might even be a bit more of a clue actually. Yeah, so this is actually going around Torridon on the 29th of May. Just showing that although there were a few days in between where the skies did clear, generally throughout that May it was remained unseasonably cold. So it did mean that a lot of the round, rather than the shorts and the t-shirt as I'd anticipated, I spent a lot of the round dressed as I am there in full sort of winter running kit really. But finally, for the last few days of the round, and this is really moving up into sort of great wilderness area and up and beyond, the skies finally lifted and the temperatures really started to rise, and thankfully, probably had some of the best days of the round. And this is sort of great wilderness, Fisherfield forest area. This is crossing over towards Shenavore Bothy. Fantastic evening climbing up one of my favourite mountains, Anshena, looking out to sea there. And also, always great on these fantastic days out is that it was now school half term, and various friends who are school teachers all now had the opportunity to come and join me. So this is another runner here, Tom Brunt, who I've enjoyed many days out with in various outings, able to join me here. And this was a good night had at Shenavore Bothy with a few more friends, including Andy Skellall on the right and Tim Laney, that I've done many outings with, including lambs and other things with. And although, as I mentioned before, generally wasn't pushing myself quite as hard as some people on some of the shorter rounds. I guess if you look at my face there, I do look a bit sort of puffy-eyed and a bit worse for wear. So I suspect it was taking, the round probably was taking its physical toll on me, perhaps a bit more than I remember. But yeah. And this was the next day, coming out of Fisherfield and heading towards the Fannex, and yeah. Highlands can be great in any weather, but when you get blue skies like this, it makes for some absolutely fantastic and memorable days. And this was a huge day that Tim and I had coming out from Chenneval over the Fannex, and that's the Fannex over there in the distance. And again, it's this aspect of the round that was so great, that you're piecing together the rounds, and you're no longer sort of following the well-trodden route. You're sort of really out in quite remote country, and seeing bits of scenery in places that you wouldn't otherwise see, I think. Jumping away there. I just included this actually just as example. This was Phil, whose surname eludes me just at the moment. One of the friends from Macclesfield Harris who come out to join or meet up with me one day on the round, and I think one of the things that struck him, and it's something he posted on their club forum when he got home, was actually just how much food I was eating on the round. And I think, yeah, again, sort of testament to JC and the support he gave is just how much shopping he was doing, because it was literally on some of the days he would literally sort of buy a loaf of bread and make it up into sandwiches, and I go off with that whole loaf of sandwiches in the back of my pack. Certainly for sort of days out, like, you know, when you're out on your own for 16 hours around Neudarts, and knowing that you're backing up days and days and days of big days. Yeah, I was probably wolfing food. I bit like sort of Tour de France riders, except I was having to carry the food myself rather than rely on soigneurs and others to feed me when I got back in the evening. Yeah, then again, more sandwiches on tops of peaks. And again, just an excuse to show some more fantastic scenery. There are the prizes there, if anyone can guess that peak in the distance there. It's looking east, and we're about to approach Ben Gerag, so that probably narrows it down. And this is climbing up back of Ben Gerag. And this was, I think this ended up as the latest day we had. So this is just on our way over to Shaun of Rye, which is, I think, in most guidebooks described as the remotest Munro. So we got there about 11 o'clock in the evening that night, and I think laid bets on what time we'd be back at the van, which I think I got closest to. We were back at the van about probably getting on for 1 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And we sort of started that day at 7 a.m. round Achnasheen to climb Fionn Ben. So you can sort of get a sense, if for those who know the Highlands and the sort of those locations, sort of quite how big the days are. But I think probably as the picture illustrates it, not as intensely physical in terms of the effort and the speed that I was going at. You know, happy to enjoy the company and the scenery and just get the job done rather than hammering it. But nonetheless, I guess I forgot I've included that photo. The feet do take a hammering on these big days. This is just I do know I included this, unfortunately. Yeah, this was up in Assynt, and between Benmore, Assynt and Carnethy, two lovely peaks on there, and on probably the windiest day of the whole round, and the wind was blowing horrendously up the glen up there and across that col, and literally one of our support party, Pam, who I guess probably only actually weighs about 6 stone, wringing wet, she was literally lifted off her feet, unfortunately, as we came across there, and dumped on some rocks about sort of 3 or 4 meters away, and ended up breaking her arm, which was a bit unfortunate. An unfortunate emergency stop, but thankfully Pam was okay and was able to carry on with us. But, yeah. this one now very much in the far north of Scotland now. So this is at the foot of Glen Cleabrec. And again, the only reason for including this particular image is that this chap here is someone called Mike Hartley. And more quiz time, I suppose. If anyone could tell me what oh no, I will break this down. I'll tell you what Mike Hartley's big claim to fame is. That Mike Hartley set back in the late 80s, and I think he still has the record for. And I don't know if anyone's jumped in and told us what that is on the chat. Yep, indeed, yep. So Mike Hartley holds the record for. Hang on, I'm jumping ahead here. Yeah, so Mike Hartley holds the phenomenal record for running the Pennine Way, which is all 268 miles of it in about 2 days and 17 hours. So yeah, absolutely tremendous run. And he was just on holiday, bagging remote peaks, and happened to see the van and stopped to have a chat and see what we were up to. And it was nice to have a chat with him. So I think. On we go again. So finally, now into day 39, and still remarkably actually having managed to stay on schedule, and almost as Tim Laney said at one point when I was beginning to get ahead of schedule, slow down your bugger because I want some peaks to climb myself. Day 39, right bang on schedule. I was stood at the bottom of Ben Hope and ready to climb the last one row. And this is about as close as I get to video footage. So this is, yeah, 39 days, 9 hours and 6 minutes after setting off up Ben Moor. This is me topping out on Ben Hope. So there we have it. And what was really touching about it was that that Charlie Campbell, although he wasn't there to greet me in person, he'd obviously been following my progress on the blog that JC was keeping, and he'd driven up several days before and left in the cairn at the top of Ben Hope. Well, as you can see there, a bottle of bubbly and a bottle of Singleton's single malt whiskey, and he left a card and that message there for me in the card, which is really nice of him. And I know I was really touched by it because I've never actually met Charlie in person, but I had several phone calls with him before and after the round, and I certainly knew how much, and others such as Manny Gorman has told me quite how much the sort of, for him as a sort of proud Scotsman, how much the Munro record meant to him, and then for him to have gone all that way up to congratulate me and to speak to me on the phone and congratulate was really touching gesture from him. Really nice. That was that, and as I said before, I certainly couldn't have done the round without the support and company of all sorts of friends. And there's Pam with her arms strapped up, and hopefully I think there's at least a couple of people online watching this, and there's Tim Gauntlet there on the far left, who's now up in Ullapool watching online. I spotted his face earlier, and Tim Laney on the left, as they've accompanied me on many rounds, and in the middle there is JC, that say that without whose support it would have never happened. And finally, there's a map of the whole lot for those or anyone who fancies a repeat run. And I have to say, I'm not in any way a stats person, so if this were Rob Woodall, he could probably tell you exactly how many meters of ascent and how many miles he'd covered and all the rest of it. But my very approximate measure of the distance, which was essentially done with a piece of string and counting contours, is that it was something over 900 miles on foot, about 800 miles on a bike, about 115,000 meters of ascent, And I've no idea how many sandwiches I got through on the round either. But that's that. And I think one final slide indeed, yes. So as Ollie said at the start, I'm very happy that everyone should make donations to Ollie's chosen charity, Maggie's, for obvious reasons that you all know. I did for my round, I did it rather than see my efforts just completely sort of selfishly. For me, was I wanted to raise awareness of the work that the John Muir Trust do, and I'm sure many of you know that they're a great charity in terms of their awareness raising and conservation issues and etc. in the Highlands of Scotland and elsewhere. And at the time I was keen that through what I was doing that people maybe would become more aware of what they did and consider joining the John Muir Trust, and perhaps give it a moment's thought, and maybe if you want to think about joining now, if you're not already members, that might be something to do. And I think with that, I will stop sharing my screen and hand over to Ollie.
Well, that was absolutely brilliant, Spike. Thank you very much. Very, very inspiring. I'm going to clap on behalf of all 55 people that have been watching this. And I can see on the screen you're getting claps from lots and lots of other people. They're all silent. Does anybody have any questions? If they do, either come off mute or stick it in the group chat.
Yeah, well, I can answer one or two of the group chat questions anyway. So the first pick was Ben Glass was the first one. I think I'm not sure if anyone got that in the end. My 100th Munro was Ben Glass, which is on the Ben Laws Ridge. So I'm not sure if anyone got that one. And
yes, it's on the list.
Oh, is it? All right. So there's a prize there for someone. I'm not sure what the prize is yet. I've got to work that one out. And Dawn Waite is absolutely quite correct. That was Amphogak in the background as we were heading towards Ben Gerard. So congratulations to Dawn.
Yeah, Hillary's got Ben Glass, 9:13.
Oh, well done, Hillary. I missed that one, sorry.
I did Amphogak 2 years ago with my two lovely boys on a really brilliant hot day. And I remember looking over to Ben Gerrig. So I knew it straight away.
Yeah, all right.
And was there a third one, Stephen, Spike, that you were going to do?
Oh, there was, wasn't it? But to be absolutely honest, I'm not entirely sure. There was a third peak in Torridon, wasn't there? So that narrowed it down quite a lot. But I think it was, and I ought to know, but it was the eastern top of Learhack, I think. And my pronunciation probably doesn't go down well with anyone, but yeah.
I thought it was Ben A. I thought it was
the middle one.
Oh, and you're quite right about Mike Hartley as well. So as well as holding the Pennine Way record, which was, well, for anyone, it was a phenomenal run. He also did, as Rob and Ollie and various others are pointing out to me now via the chat, he also did the 3 classic rounds, the Ramsey, the Bob Graham and the Paddy Buckley back to back, whereas essentially he set off, did one, was bundled into the back of I'm not sure whose car, driven down to the lakes, did the Bob Graham and was then bundled back into the back of a car, driven down to Snowdonia and did the Paddy Buckley round back to back all. And I think, I'm not exactly sure his cumulative time for those, but I think at least 2 of the rounds were under 24 hours. And I think in total he did all 3 and not much over, each of them and not much over 24 hours. But
there may be
to Rob Woodall on that. I'm sure he can give me to the nearest hour and minute the times for each of those rounds.
Yeah, actually, this is probably a good time to claim Mike was actually a Mercia club mate. Well, I don't think we belonged at the same time. Yeah, my understanding, I think he did the Ramsey in about 21 hours, the Bob Graham in just under 24. But the Paddy Buckley was really long because his feet were, his feet were shot. I think it's about 30 hours maybe for that. But, and I think, that I may be wrong, but I think that pretty much finished his kind of running career. he kind of discovered what he could do, and that was pretty much. Hopefully, I'm wrong about that, but I think he was in quite a bad shape at the end of it. Amazing thing to do.
Thanks for the info, Rob. Is there anybody on this Zoom chat who supported him? Because I know some Carnethys went to help him. I think Nigel Rose supported him, I think. Maybe not. Okay. There's a question here from Fiona Hartree, president of our club. How many shoes did you wear through, and what type?
Right, good question. I actually didn't wear out that many shoes. I think I probably wore about 3 different pairs of shoes on the round. So I started off, as I mentioned, with riding in rock lights, which is an Innovate model, and I probably rotated about 2 or 3 pairs until I worked out they were oversized, and I chopped off the heel tab. And I think thereafter, if I recall, I then had I ran the rest of it in probably 1 at most 2 pairs of Innovate X Talons, which are their sort of super lightweight racing model. And again, I actually didn't wear either of those 2 pairs of shoes out. So I probably wore about 5 different pairs of shoes in total, but none of them were really worn out. Yeah.
Fantastic. There's another couple of things in the chat window. One from Brian saying, we did Kay and Brian. I'm assuming that means they supported Mike Hartley.
Oh, right. Okay.
That's what I assume that reference is. And then from Willie Gibson, did you have any foot damage that needed treatment?
No, I didn't. No, apart from my feet looking pretty manky on that picture. No, I think once they've dried out and all the wrinkles died down, I think they were fine. So other than that, yeah, my Achilles was pretty sore for about 4 or 5 days, but that settled down. And other than that, no long-term damage. To be honest, the state of my feet, that earlier picture when I was running the Everest Base Camp to Kathmandu, my feet took a lot longer to recover from that, and they were definitely quite swollen and really puffy, and I certainly couldn't wear shoes for about a week after that, to the point where I was getting quite worried and was almost at the point of going to the doctors before they eventually sort of settled down.
Just another couple of quick questions. Another one from Fiona. What, in addition to sandwiches, did you eat?
Pretty much anything and everything, really. So, because that was one of the interesting things, because I was friends with JC as a sort of a drinking buddy, but not more than that. So, other than agreeing with him that if I was going to be out for 40 days, I wanted to eat fairly normal food, and probably thought a reasonable amount of protein was a good thing to do, and that I wasn't going to be able to subsist on gels and other sort of sweets and fancy foods. So essentially, I ate sandwiches, I guess, yeah, things like bananas, very average food, large amounts of carbohydrate, I guess, mountains of pasta or rice or potatoes, whatever I ate. Yeah, other than that, just relatively high energy types of food, but not particularly sort of technical gels or anything like that.
Great. And from Murdo, how long did it take to recover?
Interesting. I mean, what was probably interesting, actually, physically, I don't think it took me that long. I mean, almost, if anything, I was sort of psychologically recovering, because when you get into sort of one single-mindedly doing one thing for that length of time, I think the bigger downer almost was after the drive back south with JC in the van back from the far north of Scotland, where at the end of the round I'd had a couple of days lounging around on the beach and watching puffins at Durness, and not much more than that. Drove home, and at the time, because I was still out of work, I think psychologically more than anything, it took me time to recover, sort of trying to get a sense of what I was going to do next, and missing being out on the hills. I think physically I probably was, I can't remember, probably back running within a week, and I was certainly racing within a month or 6 weeks. And I seem to remember I did the British Championship race at Dollar about 2 months later, and for me did quite well in that race. So yeah, physically I don't think, compared with some people I've seen, such as Steve Birkinshaw, I know it's sort of fairly well documented that after his sort of mammoth Wainwright's round really laid himself quite low with sort of fatigue, etc. I wasn't in that sort of boat at all. I was just a bit tired and probably hadn't got any speed left in my legs because I was used to big plods rather than running. But yeah.
Okay, let's do 2 final questions. So from James Hall, have there been any near successful challenges to your amazing record?
There's at least one that I know of. There's another fell runner called Dan Duxbury that some of you might know, who is very good fell runner. He runs with Ambleside. And in 2014, he decided he was going to have a go at the round and try and break the record. And I actually came up and supported him on a few of the days. And he got round in about 44 days, I think it was. So came fairly close. I think his undoing, unfortunately for him, was that I think fairly early on his round, he or one of the people supporting him decided he was going to have a high camp up somewhere near the sort of up in Glenetiv, and his tent got blown away. And I think so after a pretty horrible night, he staggered down into the glen and essentially lost the day. And I think from then on, he was always a little bit struggling to get back on schedule, and finished a few days short in the end.
Well, still 44 days isn't bad. And then final question from Fiona, who's also known as Mark. Your first day in your new job must have been a bit of a letdown. Did colleagues have any idea what you did?
They did, I think. Yeah, well, they did know a little bit about what I did. It was a letdown. It was a job I didn't actually stick at for that long. And my office was based in, so I was working in Fife. My office was based in Methil, which some of you may know, working at somewhere called the Hydrogen Office. And I survived that job for about 6 months before I moved down to Sheffield, working down at Sheffield where I am now. So yeah, it was a bit of a letdown from various angles, including the fact that when you've spent 40 days out in the hills, any sort of job tied to an office is going to be a letdown, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, Spyke, a massive thanks on behalf of the club, on behalf of everybody. This is recorded and it will be on the website, so you'll get lots of people viewing it there as well in the coming days and weeks. For everybody on the call, I think presenting by webinar can be a bit of a lonely experience. So
yeah.
do provide any feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. I'm sure it's all going to be good. Back so Spyke can actually see some of the feedback, and just want to say a very big thank you again, Spyke. That was fantastic, very inspiring.
Yep,